Hello, and welcome back from these crazed holidays that we had. It was an incredible amount of time, and I really enjoyed myself in many, many ways. It was a wonderful holiday, so I'm wishing everyone here a blessed Yule. And I will get in with today's chapter, or this chapter, or whatever the hell we're doing. So, very much so. This chapter is called Seaborn, chapter 27. The gray, salty spray of the sea filled the air as the rain pounded heavily, driven by the howling wind. The crew of the Bodil's feasting held fast the oars and fought the power of the water they were carving their way through. They'd been out of the Swedish city and sea for a week now, having to run a wild pace to keep ahead of any who may be following their flight. The land ahead of them was Daneland, and unto this place they rode ever to win against the storm winds. We shouldn't be trying this in this weather, Eric shouted from where he sat and rode. Fitbjorn wrapped tight in his white cloak, looked back at the man. That is surely why we are going now. This is the last thing any would suspect. At the back of the ship, Inga held tight to the steerboard and pulled with straining muscle to keep it steady, and the ship pointed to the coast. We're going to smash on the rock, Eric argued. Better than that, you row the stronger. What else would we do? Turn away and go back into the wind. We are this storm. Don't you think, Brynulf? Aye, Lord, Havald replied, with a stern look that showed no gaiety. I am the storm, he grunted forcefully, and pulled with his huge back at the oar. The ship heaved in the water at the immense pressure being exerted on it from the winds, the waters, and the sailors. A little farther, Fitbjorn said, looking ahead and seeing the land there. He grinned and stuck his tongue out in pure ecstatic energy at the moment to come. When a good wave built in front of them, he looked for when the time was right to order the stowing of oars. Now, he called, and the crew groaned together as they pressed their might to lift the oars from the water. Sven finished first and carefully but quickly went to the back to aid Inga with the steerboard. Get ready, Fitbjorn ordered, and hefted his own axe in one hand while the other held the dragon prow, the great and horrid snarling mouth of the dragon looming to frighten away the Veter of this place, leaving no protection for those that dwelt in the homes ahead of Bodil's feasting. The town ahead was full of houses that appeared as gray as the forest behind him, the beach beneath them, and the sea between them. The clouds and the rain made everything keep the same washed out and plain color. The ship glided forward with a good momentum. It cut through the water like an arrow through the air as another wave formed behind them. All of his raiders were standing and bracing now, their weapons at hand, and their faces painted in charcoal and a goat's blood. They came to this beach as raiding, fighting beasts. Drink blood, Fitbjorn said. Till Valhall. The ship crashed onto the stony sand of the beach, riding up to the prow and making a thunderous scraping sound. They all leapt from the sides and front and charged together into the town. Inga and Sven were the last off of Bodil's feasting and splashed into the churning surf of the beach. The houses ahead of them, in keeping with the gray of everything, each had smoke billowing from a chimney. Those inside, using the fire to keep themselves warm, and seeming not to have yet noticed that a raiding party had come Viking. They all gathered together and formed up a wall of shields. Fitbjorn and Ragnar stood back with their great weapons to take any who'd try to flank. Immediately, they all realized how utterly overprepared they were. The formation they stood in now was suited to battlefield fighting. It was what they were used to, and they each knew it to be an effective tactic. The fighting they'd do now, though, didn't need so strong a defensive stance. Someone screamed from within one of the houses, and the sound spread to others. There must have been a peering eye through a window, and the sight of a battle-ready force on the beach in the rain must have been quite the surprise. "Warriors!" came a shout. There were other words being said, but this word specifically was easiest to determine over the splashing sounds everywhere. "Take it!" Fitbjorn commanded, and ran around the shield wall to enter the village and raid as he desired. He went to the first house and kicked the door open to screaming and cries. "Damn fool!" Eric muttered. He did, however, take the order and stood from his crouched place within the shield wall. Then, from a house ahead of them, a huge man with a bald head and an angry look emerged and started to walk toward them. In his hand, he held a large two-handed mallet that he seemed to brandish with ease. "I want the big one," Hafvald said, and sprinted for him, his slick, wet hair flying from his shoulders as he dashed forward. The others all now felt the same impetus and ran out to find plunder or food. One thing they were told specifically they wanted were pelts and furs to make fighting off the cold easier. Hafvald met the hammer-wielding man and was delighted that he seemed not to balk at the challenge this huge raiding Viking posed. He swung the hammer like he was trying to cut him down as a tree, and Hafvald took the blow on his shield, actually stumbling some to the right as he did. He righted himself quickly and found his back to a house wall. The man regained his position and swung again with the hammer, but Hafvald moved aside and let it crash into the house. Then he stepped back into the man's range and caught the hammer there a moment, which was all he needed. Hafvald turned and lunged, striking with his axe into the man's neck, deep. He spasmed and his shoulders tensed up as his body started to die, and Hafvald pulled out the axe and landed the next blow on his upper spine. This killed him instantly, and he teetered forward. Hafvald rounded him behind him and shoved him with his foot. The man's huge body crashed through the broken wall and landed on the floor. Inga watched as Hafvald entered the hole he'd just made and disappeared into the house. She shook her head and grinned as she identified the house she wanted to search. On the far left side of the town, there was a shack with numerous wooden racks that were obviously used for drying animal skins. She went to the door and held her shield to the side to make easier the kick. The door broke inward with one kick, and she stood there at the entryway a moment, looking around to make sure none would follow her in and surprise her. "I think it's good. Let's go in," Sven said from behind her. She looked back a moment at him. She hadn't realized he'd come with her. She nodded, and they both ran into the small hut and tried to look in the darkness. Sven came up beside her and put a shield out to guard against the dark before them, though it was slowly lighting to their view. A shadow from the corner then leapt for them with something in his hand, and Inga raised her shield just in time to catch the blade of some kind. She turned around the right side in a pivot and stabbed with her sword deep into the middle of the young man. Inga grunted in triumph as the 15-year-old man whimpered on the end of her blade and died as she pulled it away. He slumped to the floor, and she stepped over him. Only now did she see the room for what it was, and was pleased to see that she was right. This place served as a storeroom for skins and furs. She noted a stack of seal skins that reminded her of Ragnar's coat, and thought he might be pleased to see these. "This place is Guardian Estate," Let's go help the rest, Inga said. Just a moment, shield maiden, Sven said, standing between her and the door. Raiding always gets my blood in the boil, and my loins burn with it. Why don't we make a blessing to Freya and Frey in this victory before we go? He smirked at her and put his axe over his shoulder. No, she replied. This is not the time. And I have a man. Find a villager to slake your needs, Sven. But in Bodil's memory, you had better make sure she is willing. He sighed, dejected, and turned to leave the hut. One of these raids I will convince you, I think. You are not so fond of raiding without a good fucking too, I think. Ha! That's what I have the Brynjolf for. They emerged into the rain of the day and moved on together, walking unhurried back to the mayhem of the rain-drenched fight. I don't think he would work the same for me, Sven noted. You have to try anyway. Gods, that man knows how to fuck. Sven laughed loud and heartily. That I would not be surprised to know. He seems unable to do anything without being savage and brutal, Inga cooed. I think I may love him. Sven laughed again. A man with great luck, then. The man himself emerged from the house before them. Blood covered him and started to wash down his face in the rain. His expression was of utter, terrifying predation. He looked like a beast hunting a strong prey. They did not think the town too great a threat, and so Hafald especially had decided to raid without armor, wearing only the heavy breeches and letting his long blonde hair hang in the rain. He barely registered them in his focus. He turned to the right and stalked off to the next house, always hunting. The house he had just left started to light inside as the fire spread from where he'd scattered it. Where is his shield? Asked Sven. Sometimes he likes the axe and sword, Inga said with a shrug, but I saw him with a shield before he... Oh, there it is. He threw it down to draw a sword. Probably saw that there weren't many warriors in the village who would bear the needing for a shield. We should follow him and make certain he's protected anyway. I don't think there's a honed blade in this place that isn't ours, Sven said, though he did fall in behind Hafald with Inga. Hafald turned a corner and screamed and swung his sword. But it was caught on a shield, and they stood against each other a moment. Eiford leapt back and stood there in a crouch as Hafald regained his composure and turned to seek out others to fight. Eiford stood there a moment, and his eyes were drawn to the house that grew in flame. It would soon be consumed, and was surely only one of many that would be destroyed in their raid. He laughed at the wild excitement and ran off. Eiford battered in a door of a different house and charged in. Skadhild appeared from behind him and entered the house as well. In the home, Eiford shoved a man hard with his shield and actually sent him crashing through the woven wicker window on the far side. A woman wielding a knife slashed at him and managed to catch him on the shoulder by surprise, and he grunted in pain and turned to swing at her with his axe. He managed somehow to get caught on the wooden beam of the house and could only hold his shield up to protect himself. Skadhild stabbed the woman through with her sword and left her to fall to the floor in a pile. You have to watch the sights all around you, she admonished. Behind you, Eiford shouted as a girl jumped toward them. She wielded no weapons. She just attacked with her claws. He managed to get free the axe and stepped to intervene before she could land. He did not kill her, but only pressed her down to the floor. Stay there, he shouted. You don't need to die this day if you don't want, he growled forcefully, and this seemed to calm her some. Mother, she said, kicking out with both feet. This did nothing, and so he but stood, leaving her there. The door won't lock. She'll chase us if we leave her, Skadhild noted. The warrior's death she'll have if she does. He turned and left the house then, not caring. Skadhild spared one last look into the eyes of the rageful child and ran out after him. As they emerged, they saw Fitbjorn, Stephanos, and Olaf walking away from another house that was engulfed in fire. Fitbjorn, too, wore no armor on this raid. Neither did Olaf, but Stephanos wore the large fur cloak he'd taken from Sigtuna and had the brilliant Miklagard Roman armor under it. Nothing yet. Keep searching, Fitbjorn said as he walked by. It's cold, Stephanos said as he followed. So find yourself another cloak. Another lot of cloak, Eiford said, falling in behind him. The man grumbled something in his sophisticated tongue, loud enough to be heard by all who could not understand him. They collected Harold, who was walking slowly for his leg injury, and together they found Niels and Nathan with them. They knew more certainly there would be little actual resistance from the townsfolk, but they went from house to house looking for anything that would be good for plunder or a fight. The bloodlust encouraged a momentum that pressed them through the houses, killing some regardless of a challenge made or not. They found Hafald, Sven and Inga over the body of another dead man, and they all together gathered to continue their raiding. By the time they had searched all the houses, burned most of them, and killed many of the inhabitants, those of the town that remained would pose no challenge to them, and so, once all the raiding was done, they went into the largest house they'd found and lit a fire to sit around. Though the home was small compared to the great halls many of them were used to, it had ample space for them all to sit or lie comfortably. They were also able to light a fire in the long place in the center of the dwelling. They gathered wood from the shattered houses and made a big flame to fight away the coming cold. The rain still hammered the roof and dripped through in many places, but the fire was hot and the walls kept back the winds. Many of their cloaks were hung to dry as they ate as much from the stores they'd found as they liked. They also opened a cask of wine that had been loaded onto Bodil's feasting. They would eat and drink much and be warm after having a fight. These were comforts they had gone too many nights without, and were all glad and thankful for the bounty they'd come to. No true darkness would come this night. The summer was still showing its ever-present light down on them. Regardless, they were all aware they'd slept well. They were all aware they'd sleep well until the morning. In their tired and satisfied state, they each sat and looked to the fire, with food and drink ready at hand for each. This first bit's for Bodil, Ragnar said, pouring out some of the wine into the fire. He also took a chunk of bread and added it to the offering. She's in a better place now, Nathan said. I'll pour this out too for her, though. After making his own bloat, he put down the cup and turned to attend his sheep's hide cloak. It hung from the rafter behind and over him at an angle to protect him from drips. Many of them had done this exactly, and the effect made it seem there was a secondary tent made from animal skins in the home around them. The reflection of the heat and smoke from the fire made them warm quickly, and many had shed clothing to allow it a moment to dry. How is it always being wet? Asked Stephanos. This seems bad. Oh, it is a fact of life out here, laddie. You've been privileged with the sun and sands of your home. Wet and cold is something you'll have to learn to live with. Do things not start to rot? I know you Northmen all smell. He paused for a moment, and they all looked at him, expecting him to go on. I am done, he said, with a nod and a sly smile. They all burst into laughter. Shut up, you well-polished savage, Skadhild said, punching his shoulder. Oi, only I get to talk with him like that, Ragnar said in a mock angry tone. Oh, Inga said loudly from where she sat, leaning against the still shirtless Hafald. I haven't mentioned yet, but I found a storage house of pelts and on the far side of the village, by where the ship is. How many? Eric asked, suddenly interested and leaning forward. Must have been 12 or so. All looked good. Goat, I think, and seal. Ah, now you've got something there. A good sealskin makes like naught else. Maybe I should go and have a look at this place, Eric said, standing. I have to take a shit anyway. Should someone go with him? Asked Stephanos. Could be danger. Not from this place, Sven said, in his relaxed place against the wicker and branch wall. He had his thick buckskin coat between his back and the wicker. There must be 6 people left alive here, all women and children too. Aye, Skadhild agreed, but there is a little girl that's probably gone feral out there. She will kill you if she gets the chance. Really? Asked Harold. Eric brushed this off with a gesture and stood. I think I can manage anything out there, but the rain shows no signs of stopping. It's bright enough to see what is coming my way too, so I'm not worried. He picked his way through the hanging cloaks and to the door. As loud as the rain on the roof and the dripping was, it could not compare to the crash of the drops hitting the sand beach that they heard when the door opened. A fresh and cold breeze blew in and through the house, clearing away the smoke a moment and providing clean air. Close the damn door, Olaf said. That's frigid. He shivered and huddled closer to the fire. Eric sighed and stepped out into the oppressively cold gray of outside and closed the door behind him. The smoke immediately regained its dominance around them. So this wild child that's got the bloody fury in her, should we bring her with us? Harold asked. She's a bit young, Skadhild said. Even for you. Oh, that's not why, he protested. Didn't you get rejected by all the women in Miklagard or something? Asked Niels with a grin. No, I fucked all the whores in Miklagard. Who was it that got rejected by all the women then there? I seem to remember hearing something about that. Me, Stephanos said proudly, sitting up taller. None knew if he genuinely didn't understand or was making a joke. They all laughed with him regardless. So then, laddie, Ragnar started, when the laughter had died enough in the smoky and orange room. That puts me in mind as to where we're going next. I want to see me home, though I ken how far off that is. The land of Scots is far, Fitzbjorn said, nodding. He'd been drinking from his long curved horn and took another long drink. And no one has ever been there, he continued to muse. What? I don't think it exists, Niels said, picking up the cue. Of course it. The only one who claims it's real is this one, and I think he may be a spirit, Inga added. I'm nae some changeling, you canna idiots. Certainly, a made-up place, Niels said. Most likely that if we went there, we would fall into some spell and be eaten. Ah, like that story that you told of at the Jordan White Cloak. Oh, I'm not... Oh, I remember that one. That were a strange and terrifying idea. Ragnar then started to chuckle, and Fitzbjorn smiled. The only one who ever had spoken like this to Ragnar had ever been Bodil. This was the first time he had something approaching the kind of treatment since her death, and he was happy to see the memories enter his mind. That was a long time ago, Ragnar said wistfully, looking deep into the fire. In and among the cloaks and the fire, and all drying slowly by the heat, Fitzbjorn had a sense of home. Here, with his friends, those who were closest to him in the world, the only ones he had, the rain pounding on the roof and the laughter blustering drunkenly through the thick, wet smoke, was home. Just as he thought this, Eric burst back into the room, and the howling wind blew the door outwards with what felt like a will. Gods! He said as he settled out of the rain. He turned and reached out to pull the door closed after him. Did she get you? Skadhild asked, enthusiastic. She perked up and lifted her head to look at the door like an excited puppy. Eric shook off the wet and turned to the fire. He walked past Nathan and Skadhild to lean down by the fire. There is a great wealth of pelts in that store. He shivered. Those will be useful in trading or fashion into garments to keep off the coming cold. It will be colder than this, asked Stephanos, horrified. Much, laddie. Dinna worry, we'll make sure you're all tight bundled to keep you safe of it. I don't want to go into cold water, he said resolutely. Well, if you are a lucky one, then you won't have to. But the winds and the icy rains of the winter are impossible to avoid. You have only to get stronger, Eric said with emphasis. He sat back on his stool, farther from the fire. We all have strengths, Fitbjorn said. We will make sure everyone has a role, and that makes their strengths all our strengths. This sounded like a fine enough wisdom to them, and they nodded. We should go to my home, Nathan said. We are heading to the north anyway. Where is your home? Along the Danish coast? Asked Fitbjorn. Farther. It is in the Norseland. We will draw close enough that we could sail to the bay to see my family's fjord. The place is called Arnalander, and I would welcome you all into my hall there. And you could get again the hoard you plundered from Mediterranean, Eric observed. I think it is a good idea. How long has it been that you have not been home? Fitbjorn asked. 12 summers it is, he said, nodding to himself. My son is a full-grown man now, and my daughters will be 15 and 16. They're probably married already, Skadhild said. Sorry, Harold, I know you like them young. Enough with all this, he said, shaking and looming over her. I don't like them young. Old then, Skadhild said, with her hands up. Perhaps Nathan has an elderly mother. All laughed together, and Niels patted Skadhild on the shoulder. You, Harold sat right back down, his head spinning. Calm down, you both. Skadhild, stop pestering Harold, Fitbjorn ordered. Should we not perhaps make sure everyone wants to go to this land of the Norse? Asked Eric. He eyed Fitbjorn in a distinctively disapproving way. This was not the first time in their voyage that Eric had openly extended a challenge to his decision, and he noted every time that perhaps the man didn't agree with his leadership. He paused a moment and scratched his beard, deciding not to respond in anger or too quickly. He would answer the man when he was ready. It is a good idea that we visit everyone's home. We all have things that we have to get done, wealth to collect, family to see. There are estates to put in order. And besides, everyone wants to see their home. It has been a long time for us all. And you? Asked Eric. Where is your home, White Bear? Will we by chance be at your home first on our path? My home, he mused. I was raised in a small town far, far to the north in Norway. There is nothing for me in the place I grew. My home is here and now, with my raiders and the Bodil's feasting. He raised his cup. Skål! Skål! The rest said, in agreement, and poured out a sip for Bodil, or the ship, or each other. Eventually, Eric reluctantly, and poured out some too. Skål, he said. In the morning, we'll have the remaining villagers gather food and pelts, and we'll sail away from this beach. It's done us well, and there is still gifting they will have for us. Will they do the things we ask? Stephanos wondered aloud, clearly skeptical. Aye, they'll do, Steffi. It's a strange thing, you'll see. Think on her as this. When we tell them that we want only some few things and we're going, he shrugged his big shoulders, they'll do whatever it is that's needs done to get us out quick as you can. Ragnar, Niels said, putting his fingers to his eyes. What the fuck are you ever saying? Ragnar laughed. Always wisdom. You ought listen sometime you can, laddie. Listen, Niels said. How the hell are you propose that I... He paused. You know what? Don't describe it to me. I wouldn't understand you anyway. Miss Bodil, Ragnar said. She understood me. He smiled. She'd never admit it, though. She sails with us ever, Inga said, her eyes trained on the fire. She's the ship under us. Tip of the spear, Havald agreed. Tomorrow, we sail for the north, to homes we haven't known in too damn long. And we keep raiding. We keep raiding Havald. I'm not satisfied. They all raised their glances to look at him. I want another ship. More warriors. I want more plunder. More women. More renown. Harold Sigurdsson will follow our trail. He stood. He will hear of our fame. Well before he ever sees me again. He spoke with the growl entering his voice. We will know that there is a force of raiding, doing well, what work he is late to come do. When next we meet with these fucking lords, it will be when we ourselves have an army to match their might. We go to your homes, and we gather together whatever warriors you can find to join with our host, and we raid. His impassioned speech, leaving him breathing harder. Hail, they replied. End of chapter 27. I know that has been quite some time between my last reading and this one, and I do blame the holidays for it. It was a lot to be done, but I enjoyed my time, and I'm back now, so I will continue reading and continue enjoying myself in this beautiful, wonderful world. And I hope you all do as well. So until next time, cheers.